Hello, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be making a custom pen, as you might have guessed by the thumbnail. It's going to be made out of this gorgeous ebony right here, as well as some custom resin that I poured. This is a deep pour epoxy resin with just some mica powders in it. I've been testing some things. I did not realize that this was going to separate like that, but we're going to start off here by turning down some tenons on the resin. That way we can drill some holes in our wood and glue the two together. Right now we're turning these down to a 13 millimeter diameter. And I do need to get a tenon cutter, but for now we're just hand cutting these. It does take a little while being careful, but it's not too bad. Go ahead and part this guy off. And we'll move on to the next tenon. This is a little trick you can use, and in this situation it's actually a decent use case. This wrench has just been ground down and kind of sharpened on one of the tines, and you can use the long one as a guide, and it's a 13 millimeter wrench, so as soon as you hit 13 millimeters it'll kind of slip on and stop cutting. Decent little tip. It leaves a really rough surface though, so in this situation it's actually really good. It helps give the glue something to hold on to, but if you're turning tenons for cutting your threads, it makes for some kind of rough threads. And we're going to go ahead and start drilling out our wood here. We got a 13 millimeter drill bit. We've got a little hole in the center to start, and we will mark how deep we need to go. This is really tight, so this is the second wood and resin or wood and plastic pen that I've made. The very first pen like this that I ever made was a hybrid like this, and kind of a almost beginner's luck that turned out well. But doing this in the future, I think I'm going to drill that 13 millimeter hole in the wood first, and then with the full rod, instead of having to chuck up this little teeny piece, I'll turn the tenon down and fit it. Easier to fit that down to the drilled hole, which has a known diameter already. So just making sure that fits, and moving on to our next piece. This one I accidentally turned down a little further than 13 millimeters, and rather than waste the bit, I turned it back down to 12 millimeters. This is going to be the body piece, so with 12 millimeters I'm not running into any issues. In the cap, I'm going to be drilling a 12 millimeter hole down through the cap, so I need at least 13 millimeters to have some meat to keep things glued together. On the body, the widest hole that I'm going to be drilling is going to be a 9 millimeter hole, so this 12 millimeter tenon is going to work for this. And again, it was a little tight, so chuck that back up and turn it down a little bit. It's easier to rechuck this if it's long rod still, so I think I'll, like I said, reverse that process for future pens like this. And then we're going to start in on our section. Just facing this off so it's nice and even. Little divot for the drill bit to follow. You can do a center drill for this. It's probably better to do that technically, but I find it's been working well just to use the corner of my square cutter there to work. Sorry about the squeaks there, that's my dog barking in the background. We are currently turning this down to a 10mm diameter to start cutting our section threads. I do find that kind of no matter what, you are going to get a little bit of chatter when you're working unsupported like this. It's not a huge deal. It's usually not something you can even feel a lot of the time, but something to be aware of. A little chamfer just to make things come together a little bit better, and I just use mineral oil for all of my drilling and cutting. Well, drilling and threading, I should say. And then just actually using the parting tool on this one to cut that relief in the back. And then check in to make sure things look good on the mandrel. And drill things out. This is going to be for a Parker, or not Parker, it's going to be for a Pilot G2 pen refill that will also fit certain Schmidt rollerball refills as well as Pentel Energel and other similar refills. So it's a pretty versatile pen body. We're going 30mm deep with a 1/4 inch drill bit for this first step. And I just like backing things out, clearing all those chips and keeping things lubed up and nice and cool. This resin can get gummy if it gets too hot, and I did run into issues with that when drilling out the body. So that's something to keep in mind in the future too. Next we're moving on to a 3/16 drill bit, and we're going an additional, I believe it's 5mm. Check my notes here. Yes, go an additional 5mm after that 30 with the 3/16. I don't always oil these smaller drill bits. Next we're going to go in with a 1/8 drill bit and go an additional 6mm. And lastly our 7/64. And we're going to go all the way through the blank with this. I found is just the easiest way to do it. That's also nice too because usually I have a little center divot on the other side of the blank, and it's good to see that hole come straight out that center divot and know that you've drilled all the way through perfectly concentric. I'm just going to test fit that, and we're looking good. I forgot to hit record while starting to shape the section, but we've just got this screwed into our little homemade mandrel. I bought some Delrin, turned it down, drilled a hole, threaded it, and it just holds the section by those threads. On a fountain pen, I don't know if I would trust this type of mandrel. I would prefer to have one that threads into the nib unit threads. But on these roller balls and ballpoints, it's not too bad because you have a pretty beefy amount of material to hold on to. You've got a good 2 or so millimeter wall thickness around those section threads. But we're just turning this down to just below 11mm, or not 11, 12mm, like an 11.8mm diameter. And then measuring out and marking off where we want the end of our section to be. This is where the refill is going to stick out of the tip. I cut this to about 37mm usually from the end of our tenon shoulder, and then I shape this out. Most of the pens I've been doing so far have had this sort of hooded, gripped shape to the nib. I've been getting some feedback from a local pen shop that's been hosting my pens for consignment sales, and I'll probably be doing some in more of a full cone You can kind of see the movement here when I go to saw that. It was a little gummy, so I had to wait a few moments for it to cool down. We'll clean that up, check and see if it's sticking out enough. It's not. So we'll just slowly eat this back and slim things down. A lot of my earlier pens have been really chunky down at the tip here too, and so that's been a turn-off for some customers. I've been slimming these down a little bit and having that refill stick out a little bit more. I had been noticing that myself, that it wasn't super satisfying to use some of the pens that I've been carrying myself at work because I was having a hard time seeing the tip around the pen tip, seeing the tip of the refill. So you want to make sure that that's sticking out enough and that you're nice and slim. I'll go ahead and just knock out the sanding and polishing on the section now, since this is the only bit of the pen that I end up actually polishing to a high shine. Everything else I leave nice and matte, as you've probably noticed in the thumbnail for this video. This is just my standard process. I usually get a decent enough finish off of the tools to start with 800 grit, and we're just wet sanding with 800. This is, you could definitely shape a little bit quicker with a lower grit, but then you're going to have to get out those deeper scratches. So I found 800 is a nice balanced starting point for removing enough material to make things, fairly time efficient, but also leaving a smooth enough surface that you're really not dealing with too many deep scratches that are making it a pain to get that nice glossy, glassy finish at the end. Then we just give it a nice horizontal sand, turning it by hand so that we can knock down some of those radial scratches. Then I do like to change the water out after the 800 grit before going on to my Zona papers. These start at what they say is a 600 grit equivalent, but they seem to cut on this low grit here, the green, a lot slower than even the 800 grit or like 1000 grit sandpaper that I use. So I'm not quite sure, but I will say that this stuff works wonders. Even on this epoxy resin, which is fairly soft compared to the urethane resins like the Alumilite Clear Slow and whatnot that call them commercial makers use, but it does a pretty good job on this. And wet sanding keeps things nice and cool. The big issue that I've found with things like Dr. Kirk's Micro Magic and Scratch Free, which I absolutely love for acrylic like kit pens, and those Acrylester and commercial kits or commercial blanks like that, is you have to build up a little bit too much heat and friction with those polishing waxes for the epoxy resin that I've been using. It starts to get gummy, and you get, even with high grit, you get sort of a cloudy matte finish, which is not what I'm shooting for here. So I have found that it really is beneficial to do the wet sanding here, if only for the temperature control. It's also nice that you don't have to deal with all of the fine particulate that sanding creates, especially with plastics, and not wanting to breathe that stuff in. But that temperature control and keeping things cool and hard, not gummy, is a big aspect to why I prefer to do the wet sanding, other than also it's just actually the most efficient way to do this. So just slowly working through those grits, dry this off, and as you can see, it's pretty well polished. It looks decent, but we're going to give it that little bit of extra shine, completely miss our focus, and we're going to hit it with some Meguiar's Plastex. This is just a kind of general purpose clean and polish. Put it on, rub it in before it dries, you buff it off, and that gives it that extra kind of glassy, watery, wet shine. Now that our glue has had time to dry, we will move on to working on our body here. Just kind of evening things up a little bit. I do apologize again about the focus. I think I notice here in just a moment. I did notice when I was doing the wrench trick on the previous bits that it was leaving things about, I would say 0.1 or 0.15 millimeters oversize. So that's actually kind of perfect. It's really not a deep rough finish, so I was able to use the wrench to kind of speed that up a little bit. And then we're just threading. Saw this in my last video if you checked that out. Yeah. There we go. Finally realized that we were out of focus. So just cleaning up the back of those threads, that gives a little relief so that you don't get a death grip from the cap. And as you can see, we have a very short tenon. I'm still working on single start threads, so you really have to keep things short here to not have it take ages and dozens of turns to get the cap on and off. I believe with this pen I got about 2 full turns to get the cap fully seated. Next step here is going to be drilling a 9mm diameter hole, about 8 to 10 millimeters deep. This sometimes I will actually measure and base off of the actual section itself, but it's not really too big of a deal if you drill this deeper than you need and thread a little bit more than you need. This is something that nobody's really going to see on a consistent basis. So if you have extra threads down into here, it's really not too big of a deal. I do try to keep my cap threads as minimal as possible. But yeah, if this is a little over threaded in here, it's really not too big of a deal. With the refills that this takes, Pilot G2, Energel and stuff, those refills will last a fairly decent amount of time. So I would be surprised if somebody's, opening a pen like this up more than, once every month, few months. If you're running through refills faster than that, good on you. You're writing a lot. Students, maybe. I don't know who'd be doing that in just their normal life, but just checking to make sure that that section fits. It looks like it does. So we'll move on to drilling out for the refill to fit down in the body. And I just know that for these G2s, it takes about 70 millimeters, which on this drill bit is a little past the end of the flutes. So we'll go to the end of the flute and then kind of test fit and nibble away after that. Make sure that we get the perfect fit. And then you just got to kind of stop frequently to make sure that you're clearing chips. And I'm not quite sure what was going on here, but for some reason it wasn't wanting to go in. So I think we just had some wood powder build up in there. Some sawdust. And then, yeah, just kind of double check in, and it looks like we are all good to go there. Toss our cap blank in and get started on that guy. Really, this one's fairly simple. We're just going to face this off, put a little divot for our for a drill bit and just sort of even out that transition a smidge. You can see the sort of duotone look of this resin. This is a new deep pour epoxy resin that I'm trying, and with the difference in density between the two color mixes I had, it just kind of ended up separating out. I didn't wait long enough for things to start setting up before pouring, so we got a pour color separation. Well, I mean, it's separated, but not in the swirly, cool way that we were hoping. So those will make some cool accent pieces, but there's a couple ways to do this sort of hybrid pen with the wood and plastic or resin. One way to do it is how I've done it, and make just a small piece that goes inside, and you'll have that um, transition from wood to plastic on a ballpoint pen like this. I find that this is good enough. On a fountain pen, you do want to do an actual full plastic sleeve that's going to fit inside of the wood, so that you can have a nice, actually airtight seal inside the cap. Ballpoints, especially if you're going with something like a capless rollerball refill, that's made to have the cap off for ages, you're definitely going to be fine with some porosity in the wood like this and a little bit of air movement. But with the extra friction that wood does bring compared to these plastics with these drill bits, I did have some kind of gumminess with the resin, so I did sort of have to let it sit and wait, especially before doing these threads, to make sure that it was stable enough to accurately take them. But we're just going in a little ways, 2 or 3 turns worth basically, and then testing to make sure that everything fits. It's not running as concentric as I would like, but I do usually like to start my shaping of the cap here, and I will say I went a little too thin right off the bat for what I would usually prefer. This pen, it was going to be for me, so it wasn't too big of an issue, but I definitely took much deeper of a cut than I had meant at the start there, unfortunately. And initially I was actually planning on keeping all of the plastic parts polished here. I ended up getting lazy and not wanting to mask off the wood to polish things back up after doing all my shaping. So I did end up going with a matte finish after trying a couple different finishes, but still haven't quite decided where I've landed on doing a finish for these hybrid customs. I think I will end up taking the time and masking things off to fully polish, or maybe even just doing like a high polish matte, if that makes sense. Doing like a 3000 grit, where like it still has some shine to everything, but it won't be too bad to do that to the entire pen body instead of having to mask off the wood and or mask off the resin to keep things from messing up. But I do like to polish this part now before I shape things, because it's a little hard to do work holding once you've shaped this down. And then we are tossing this on the mandrel and starting to shape. This was a fun one, I gotta tell you. This ebony, initially I had been hoping to get some African blackwood, and yeah, we had a big catch there. And unfortunately, that big catch did strip out some threads. I was lucky enough in that this pen did still end up capping properly. It stripped out mostly the mandrel, so I just kind of had to do a little editing on that, but as you can see, it's not quite screwing on properly. And we just turn off all those threads, turn down a little tenon, and rethread just to get through this pen. I did need to make some new mandrels. These Delrin mandrels, I would say probably you'll get, if you're lucky, about 10 pens out of them before they are really losing their accuracy and whatnot. And that's kind of been my experience so far. So I do need to make some new ones. I've put off a couple of pen projects because of that, but I think I might actually make a video doing that. So I may wait a little bit longer. We'll see. I don't have a ton of time around my day job and making things to shoot videos like this. That's why this is not quite as cinematic as I would, personally prefer it to be with the fixed perspective and whatnot. But yeah, this worked well enough to be able to at least finish this cap, and we were just careful. But like I was saying, I was hoping to get some African blackwood, and decided to take a chance on this ebony. And unfortunately, this was a fairly dry, kind of, as you can see, powdery, not terribly fun, I would say, wood to work with. It finishes beautifully, but yeah, turning it is not great. I was hoping for some African blackwood, which is much darker wood overall and actually works very similarly to like a plastic. And I'm looking forward to doing, hopefully, some all wood custom pens and doing the section and everything out of the African blackwood, because I do believe that it is dense enough and has kind of that, sort of plasticky enough property to be able to take threads fairly decently. So just parting this off and doing a little trimming. I had to part a little closer to the end than I would have liked, and so we have a little bit of a hole that we have to deal with from the pilot hole that I drilled. I do not currently have any center drills. I need to just bite the bullet and spend the like $10 to buy a pair, but I've been lazy and I've been drilling my little pilots with a brad point drill bit, which has been leaving a little extra teeny hole that goes pretty deep down into the end. So just kind of trying to sand that out here, especially with the mandrel being very hastily remade here. It's not running quite as true as I would like, and isn't quite as secure as I would like, so I don't want to do too much work with a tool on there. But just cleaning that off with a little denatured alcohol and noticing that that hole is a little deeper than I would prefer to have. So just working that out. I think I dropped down to 600 grit to do some of this. This wood, for as dry and powdery as it was, it really loaded up the sandpaper something fierce. I do apologize if you can hear banging in the background. I am currently next to some construction, and I wish I could get rid of it, but it's kind of stuck. And just clean things off again. And I did go ahead and use some scratch free on this, and it did start causing me some issues. You can see we're fine right now, but as I buff this in and things start to heat up, you can start to see the cap wobbling a little bit, especially once I turn the speed up here. And that's just due to the resin, especially as thin as I ended up getting it. That's just the resin getting soft as it heats up. That stuff has a pretty low temperature before it starts to flex. So move on to our body here. And we're just taking this extra slow compared to the cap. A lot of the time with the plastics, I'll get into a fairly deep depth of cut moving down that taper from the headstock towards the tailstock, but reverse that a little bit on this guy. And yeah, we're just keeping it slow. I do want this fairly slim. I don't want this too chunky. So we do have quite a bit of material that we need to take down, but I'm just going to kind of nibble away at it here. I'm not actually shooting for like a particular diameter. I just want to have, you know, in the ballpark. I think I went in the ballpark of about 15 or 14 and a half millimeters. Again, as you can see, trying to save as much length as possible, and I got a little bit of a hole in the end still. Again, this is a pen for myself, so I'm not too worried with stuff like that. I do like the grain that's in this ebony. Once you wax it up and get a little bit of a finish on there, it's very dark and it is kind of hard to see, but as it's sort of aged over the last week or two since I shot this and I've been carrying it, it's been a little bit more apparent. The thumbnail for this video I shot today while editing, which is about a week and a half, I want to say, after shooting and making this. So, wait, 1 week to the day. So, there's some visible grain, but it is definitely much darker than it looks while you're sanding. True of just about any wood. Yeah, we went with some scratch free again here. Scratch free is around 1500 grit equivalent abrasive wax, if I'm not mistaken. And then we're doing a little zona on the resin here. Not a huge fan of doing it right here simply because we're getting wood buildup in here as well. I figured since I was already getting it from trying to do the that resin accent that I might as well just hit the wood with it too. And it kind of made it nice. I think it was more just polishing the wax that was still on there, but it ended up looking okay at that point. This is where I wish that I had left things. At this point, it looked very nice, but I got a little experimental, shall we say. I was like, well, the section's already glossy. I'll try to gloss up the whole thing. So I tried a couple other things, including putting some Pens Plus on there, but yeah. This is about where we landed after a little bit extra work. So polished section, matte, everything else. It's been a nice little pen for my EDC slip. No clip to get in the way. But thanks for coming along, and we'll catch you in the next one.